Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end-of-life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm excited to share a unique and beautiful approach to memorialization that also gives back to our planet, reef memorials. For those that don't know, reef memorials involve creating artificial reefs that include cremated remains. These reefs are placed into the ocean where they help to rebuild marine habitats. Today, we have George Frankel, founder and CEO from Eternal Reefs. George, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
So can you start by telling us what inspired you to start this company?
Sure. I had a different business, and I was dealing with my brother had just been diagnosed as terminal. My mother's life was winding down. Both my brother and I knew that my mother would be the last person in our family cemetery plot. And she ended up being the last person. Neither my brother nor myself had any interest in being buried. And I was working with a gentleman by the name of Don Brawley, and I had known Don when he was in high school. And he had gone to the University of Georgia. And while he was there, he had gotten into scuba diving. And he and a group of divers were diving in the Florida Keys on a fairly regular basis. And one night they decided that they were going to find a way to fix the degradation of the reefs. And they developed this system called a reef ball. And I had known that Don was basically involved in this when he was in college, but really had not followed up with it. He had made a commitment to his father-in-law that when his father-in-law passed, he would be included in one of these reef projects. Don came into the office one day and said, I had known his father-in-law had passed. He explained to me that he needed some time to go down to Florida and work with this reef ball project and memorialize his his father-in-law. And the instant he said what he was going to do, it made all the sense in the world to me. Like I said, there was no more room in our family cemetery plot. Neither of us had any interest in being there. And so I said, Don, of course, you can have the time off and go down and do this. But when you come back, I want to really sit down and talk about what this is and what its viability is. And that was really the beginning of Eternal Reefs, that conversation. When he came back, I had already spoken with my brother. Uh, this was just a natural for the two of us. And we kind of felt that this may be something that the general public would like to be participating in. And that was really the beginning of it.
Now, I know that you are a nonprofit, and that's part of your mission. Can you tell us a bit about that and tell us a bit about your overall mission?
Sure. Our mission statement is that Eternal Reefs is working to preserve, protect, and enhance the marine environment for the benefit of future generations through the use of memorialization. So, pretty much what we do is families contacted us, they'll make a donation, they'll choose the reef site that they're interested in being a participant in, and the schedule. We will. Do you want me to go through the whole process at this point?
Go ahead.
And so families, when they contact us, they'll pick which location, which scheduled dates they would like to participate in. The vast majority of these families will come and bring their loved ones' cremated remains. And our whole process is a fully interactive process. We want the families to be fully involved. And so it's a 4-day program. Generally speaking, most of the families who come, they'll bring their loved ones' cremated remains. And we try to do this over a weekend so that there's as little time off from work as necessary or kids from school. And so a Friday is when we do the casting. This is the opportunity where each family will take their loved one's cremated remains and mix it into liquid concrete, which we will then transfer into a mold called a pearl. We put the pearl aside so it'll cure overnight. We put fresh concrete on the top of the reef ball, and the families get to personalize the reef ball with handprints, written messages in the concrete. They can put small, non-invasive, environmentally safe mementos. A lot of times we'll have coins from country that they visited or military medals for honors they received. Uh, all kinds of different things that really, when you take a look at the top of the reef, a lot of times you can instantly know who that person was in real life. We have people will bring, if dad was a carpenter, they'll bring hammers and chisels and nails. And so you know who these people are. And it's this process between the mixing of the remains and the personalization of the reef that we can watch a real transformation in these people. They take ownership of this. This has instantly become a whole lot more than my mother or my father's memorial. This is now something, it is a tribute to their life that I created with my own hands. And this is going to be a permanent addition to the marine environment. And people leave, and I'll jump ahead a little bit, but when people leave, they don't go home and say, we just went to Florida and buried grandma. What they say is, you wouldn't believe what we just did in Florida this week. And it really is that big a difference. Eternal Reefs was founded about the same time as the natural burial movement in the United States. And we work very closely with those folks. We actually refer to ourselves as the surf and the turf of the natural burial movement. But what we both recognized right up front was the need for personal involvement. I had to deal with my mother's funeral, my father's funeral, my brother's funeral, an aunt and an uncle. And so you go into the funeral home and you make a handful of decisions, write a check, and then you become just another third person in the room while the funeral director and his staff take care of everything going forward. So personally, what my sense was that I wanted to do something, and writing a check is not doing something in my mind. And so when we started to do this, we started to realize there were opportunities that families could participate. And it really became a big part of what we do. Parents tell us a lot of times when they bring small children to our events, they couldn't find a better way to introduce the child to a loss, because this isn't the traditional burial. This isn't a dark room with everybody talking in whispers. This isn't a hole in the ground. This is much more of an arts and crafts project.
Yep.
And it really is a positive process for everybody. There are plenty of times for tears, and there's certainly tears being shed. But overall, people feel very good about participating. And that's true with the green burial movement as much as it is with Eternal Reefs.
So I have a couple questions. I remember when we spoke last time, you told me the story of the first, because originally you didn't have the families involved.
That's correct.
And so I love the story of the first person who was, who insisted, who wanted to get involved. Can you tell that story?
Sure thing. When we first started, our process took 30 days because we included the cremated remains in the entire reef structure. And the reef ball, when it's cast, requires 30 days to cure before it can be put in the ocean. So we had a family, and so we never really encouraged anybody to come and participate, aside from the fact that we do this in Florida, we do this in the middle of the summer, and nobody in their right mind wants to be in a concrete yard in July on a 100-degree day and 110% humidity. So we never actually encouraged, but we had families that from time to time would come. We had a woman come, and she was gorgeous, but her face, she was probably mid-50s, and her face was just chiseled in stone. And she came in and she was holding, it was her son's remains, and she was holding her son's remains like this, not even open-handed. And she was with what we found out later was her relatively new husband of about 20 years. She was memorializing her son from a previous marriage who had taken his own life. And so we recognize a lot of times that when there is a situation of suicide, there's a certain amount of personal sense of responsibility. She came in, she mixed the remains into the concrete. She did everything that she was supposed to do. She puts her hand in the wet concrete and makes a handprint, and she holds it up, and she looks at me with tears streaming down her face, with the biggest smile you ever could imagine on her face. And every one of us talked about this after the fact. When she left the concrete yard that day, I promise you, she was 20 years younger. There's another piece to this particular story, and that is this memorial was going to be in Charleston. Her son was a surfer, and this was where, well, she and the father had decided that this would be the right. So we're there, and she comes in, and she's coming in with her new husband of 20 years and her fully extended family, the children that they had together, plus the children he had from his previous marriage. Shortly after that, the father came in with his new extended family of X number of years, again, with his children with his current wife and his children, and the wife's children from previous marriage. There were probably about 25 or 30 people there. And we're watching all of this and taking pictures and stuff. And one of his daughters came over to me and she put her arm around me and she pointed to the two of them. And she said, "You see that?" And they were standing there right in front of their son's memorial with their arms around each other. And she said, "You know, we've been, uh, he's been married to my mother now for 20 years. And for 20 years, we have never met any part of the other family. And the only communication they ever had was through attorneys from the day they separated until today." And you sit back and you recognize the power that these things have, and everybody is going to react differently. I have no need to go back to my parents' cemetery plot. Uh, I carry what I need with me for all my family. Other people need something much more, and I hate to use the term concrete, but they need something that's really very solid for themselves. And it changed how we looked at the business. It had a huge impact on us. Um, and it really became a core point of us now. We switched our process to the 4-day process. Yep. So that we could accommodate these families on a greater scale. And to this day, every one of us will tell you, the involvement with the families is still the best thing we've ever done. We hear stories about these people. You wish you would know them in real life. Yep. People tell us, we've had several folks tell us that they became marine biologists because they did their father or their mother or their grandfather, and we're so taken with what we've done, what they've done. And when people see the contribution of these types of memorials, it really is amazing. They do exactly what we say they do. They create new habitat. Mother Nature loves these materials as new pallets. She's our partner. She does all the finish work. We put these reefs on the ocean floor. Fish migrate onto them literally as they are going down and being placed. And depending upon water conditions, we can have measurable growth within 6 weeks.
Now, sorry to interrupt, and because I wanted to ask, while we're talking about the ecological benefits of this, I know that you have worked with the U.S. Marine Corps, not the Marine Corps, but
the Army Corps of Engineers.
Thank you very much, the Army Corps of Engineers. I don't know why that just slipped my mind. And you've worked with other organizations to really make sure that you were doing this right, that you were that what you say that is happening, that you're helping rebuild these environments, that's actually happening. Can you talk a little bit about that and the measurable difference? How do they even measure it? How do they know that it's helping?
Sure. First off, everything that Eternal Reefs does, it's permanent. And it's permitted in advance. And depending upon the type of permit, we end up having to deal with as many as 27 different federal, state, and local government agencies. So the process is very well managed from a regulatory standpoint. And everything that we do, we have to report it before we put it in the water, and we have to report it after we put it in the water. In most cases, the states do periodic monitoring of these reefs. When I say periodic, it might be 5 years between the time they go down and the next time they come back. They've got a lot of reef sites they've got to manage, and there are other responsibilities that they have. So we periodically get reports of what these reefs are doing. And there's never been a negative response at all. They do stay where they're supposed to stay. Because the concrete is pH neutral, Mother Nature doesn't have to wait to scour the outer surface to make it where marine life can develop and start to mature and propagate. They'll see them covered with barnacles. They'll see them covered with shit sea life. And without exception, they're going to be covered with fish at different sites, type, whatever is in that different environment.
Where do you have um, where do you have different sites? Because I know that you started in Florida, but now you've expanded. And how did you choose the sites?
First off, we work directly with either the state or the local reef coordinator, depending upon what the site is. Our criteria are they need to be vacation destination locations. And we say that for two reasons. One is we've already got a built-in constituency for this particular community, people visiting it. The second is these are the communities that have generally got the equipment that we need. We are a very equipment intensive kind of a business, and transportation of these reefs out to the reef site is the core issue that we deal with. The smallest reef that Eternal Reefs uses is 750 pounds when it goes in the water. These are not inconsequential weights. And so we need certain types of boating equipment. And it really does limit us a lot of times to where we can or can't work. But our focus is really on these types of locations for those reasons. We started in Florida. We did our first couple of projects in Florida. We now work in 7 different states. We work everywhere from Texas and the Gulf all the way up to, we've now been approved to work in New York. We haven't started working there yet. We will probably do that in 2025. But the reef coordinators work with us for very easily work with us for 2 primary reasons. One is reef balls are without question the international gold standard for designed reef material. They're used in more than 80 countries. There are several million of them in the world's oceans. They're used for everything from habitat restoration to coral transplanting to oyster bed development to mangrove restoration. If you can think of an application for a reef ball, an application that requires some type of reefing material, a reef ball is the ideal material. pH neutral, it stays where it's supposed to stay, and it does what it's supposed to do.
George, when and how did the Green Reef movement begin?
Reef balls were developed, and I believe the first project that they ever did was 1992. So very quickly they became adapted around the world, quite honestly. As I said, they are one of the few materials they are the only designed reef material that when they were designed, they took into consideration 2 primary considerations. First off, whatever they designed had to be stable in the marine environment. If it was going to move around, it was going to be more dangerous than it was going to be productive. Second question was it going to be material that Mother Nature wanted to work with? And what they came up with was absolutely brilliant. They have a round design that's hollow in the middle that has portholes throughout the structure. What this does for stability, and by the way, 80% of the weight is in the lower 40% of the reef ball itself. What this does for stability is when storm energy, and that's really what we're referring to, builds up, there's no place for the storm energy to fixate on the reef and move it. All that energy is going to go through, around, and over the reef ball. I'm never going to tell you Mother Nature can't do something. What I will tell you is if you lose those reef balls, you probably got much bigger problems on land than you do in the ocean. But the second thing was, they addressed the stability issue right up front. The second question was this going to be material that Mother Nature wanted to work with, that was like? That's where they developed a special pH neutral concrete. And when we pour it, this concrete, first off, it's pH neutral, but we create a very heavily textured outer surface on the reef ball. And we do that intentionally. What we do is we coat the inside of the mold before we pour the concrete in there with sugar water. When the concrete has set, we remove the mold and we immediately hose down the reef ball on the outer surface. What the sugar water does is it retards the concrete from setting up. So as soon as we rinse it off, all of that Portland kind of comes loose and it creates this incredibly pitted outer surface. And what Mother Nature likes about that is, one, is pH neutral. But two, this pitted surface, we refer to the ocean as a nutrient-rich desert. There's bazillions of these microorganisms floating around looking for some place to call home. When they land on a reef ball, because of the texture down the surface, there's a space for them to burrow in, and they get to start to mature and propagate before other fish or other marine life can start to feed on them. This is why we get growth fairly quickly, and this is why, without question, reef balls are Mother Nature's favorite ally.
How do the local communities respond to your projects, and what role do they play in the success of these reefs?
Without exception, every community that we've ever worked in has both benefited significantly and embraced the concept. When I say they've benefited significantly, first off, what they're getting is they're getting a new fishing site, nothing else. The second thing is that we are bringing people to this community, some who've never been there, others who have been there periodically, and we can testify and prove that these families return. They may not return every year, but every couple of years, let's go down and see how Dad's been doing, and they'll come back. We've had whole families learn to scuba dive so that they can visit their loved one. So, from a contribution standpoint for the local community, it's a strong positive. The other two things is these are marine-based communities. Most of these people are fishermen or have some real strong affinity to the ocean. And so this type of a memorial is fairly much a natural for that particular community or that immediate region. So we get a lot of benefit from that. But the last piece is we get publicity and the community gets publicity. And the concept of green memorialization, specifically reef memorialization, gets a whole new PR boost and the word gets spread further.
When you started, what challenges did Eternal Reefs face from traditional funeral homes?
Well, when we first started, we very naively thought that the funeral industry would adopt us as a long lost rich uncle. If you think back to the late 1990s, the funeral industry was really dealing with a huge switch from what people refer to as traditional burial to cremation. And we're doing this for a number of different reasons. Two primary reasons. One is cost, but the second one is time. And the advantage of cremation is that you don't have to get into a Chinese fire drill when somebody passes away. Mom passed away. I got on the phone. I called my brother. I called my cousins. We all made arrangements. I'm sorry, when my brother passed away, my mother was buried in a traditional manner. But I called my family and I explained what had happened. And I said, listen, he passed away in February. And I said, listen, in July, we have a project in Galveston. Why don't we get together and do his memorial then? Nobody had to take kids out of school. Nobody had to change meetings. Nobody had to find flights. And so there really is the opportunity to digest the loss. And it really turns out to be a positive process. So once again, I forgot your question.
Just a gosh, I was so intent on oh, the funeral
Oh,
homes, and yeah.
so we really thought that the funeral industry would adopt us as this long luxury jungle because we were going to be a new product offering on the cremation side with a fairly healthy profit margin. What we didn't realize was that we were actually engineering a social change, and I say that in in line with the green burial movement. We were emerging at the same time, and in our own way, we were both going to be viewed. We didn't realize this as predatory towards the funeral industry. I would go into, and there was a legitimate side to this. It wasn't just a question of the changing times, but I would go into a funeral home and sit down with the funeral director, and I'd explain what it is we're doing and how it's going to benefit them and how it's going to benefit their families. And you walk out with a positive sense, but nothing ever happens. And after a couple of these experiences, all of a sudden I realized, they have no idea who George Frankel is. They have no idea what Eternal Reefs is. They have no idea what I am talking about. And there is no way on God's green earth they're going to let their customers start dealing with me directly. And so we made an internal decision that we were going to switch and go directly to the consumer. In so many ways, it's the smartest thing we ever could have done. Uh, Not one of our advisors, board members, anybody recognized the influence this social change was going to have and how to create a social change. I tell people, if it wasn't for Facebook, we would not be here today. Facebook literally made Eternal Reefs, whatever the degree of success it is responsible for it. And so I'm no social media guru, but the reality is that social media is the tool starting in the early 20s that was going to be able to take not just Eternal Reefs, but any of these um, industry changing startups to the public awareness.
Yep.
And so over time, we have gotten so much acceptance with regard to the public that now funeral homes are calling us directly. And we've made the decision that the complexity of what we offer, again, because we go through so many regulatory hurdles and we've got so many issues. And at the end of the day, after every problem has been addressed, there's one more that I have no control over, and that's Mother Nature. If we're going to have a storm, we can't go out.
Yeah.
But the reality is that people accept that, people understand the weather. And at this point in time, we now have got so much credibility that there is no reservation, at least that we're aware of, from any funeral home picking up the phone and saying, I've got a family that's interested. And so that's really where it's come pretty much full circle.
So it's really interesting that you talked about how people, it used to be that when a family, when someone passed away, they would bury their dead, they'd bury their loved one, or, within a couple days, right? Less than a week. And so people did have to rush over, clear, get away from work. And now we have that luxury of being able to wait until it's convenient. Do you think that the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, influenced that a lot?
There is no question in our mind that the pandemic did one very positive thing from a negative standpoint. But what it did was, I don't care who you are, what you believed in, where your thoughts were with regards to the pandemic and what should be done. Every single one of us, when we looked in the mirror, had to see our own mortality. And for the first time as a culture, we started talking within our families about death, started talking about what we want done, started talking about what if. And it was a very healthy conversation to have. I cannot tell you how many families have told us over the years, if Dad had known about this, or he never told us what he wanted done, but, this is ideal for him. We're now seeing a lot more families literally saying, this is what I want, or this is what he wanted or she wanted. And from just a social standpoint, I will tell you that the COVID pandemic did our culture a tremendous favor only in the terms of making us aware that these discussions need to happen. I don't know a funeral director, and I'm not a funeral director, but we deal with some of the same things, that hasn't had one family member say, Dad told me this. Another family member says, no, Dad told me this. And under the best of families, these things can be very, very disconnecting. Yeah. Now, you're going to see a whole lot less of this. And it's healthy for the family. We tell people going through the living will and the final will is the greatest gift you can give your family and yourself, because it defines what you want done. My big issue with the living will is It's so critical at the point that you can no longer advocate for yourself. My mother had a stroke. I was fully responsible for all of her care decisions. I couldn't ask her anything. My mother was Catholic. She lived 10 years with her stroke. But only because by the way, she had told both my brother and myself that she wanted to be cremated. We both knew that wasn't true. I'll tell you a little secret story about our family. My father was raised an Orthodox Jew. My mother was raised by nuns. My father is buried in an Orthodox Jewish cemetery. And my mother, when my dad died, my mother said, I can't be buried next to dad, so I want to be cremated. At this point in time in my life, my brother and I, we grew up at odds ends. And I mean, as far apart as two human beings could be. The day my mother had her stroke and I called him, we have been friends ever since.
Mm.
So it made a big change. But I forgot where I was heading.
We
So the funeral. So I went in when my mother had the stroke. I had to confirm all our funeral arrangements because we didn't know if it was going to be tomorrow or years down the road. So I go out and meet with the funeral director, and I start to explain what my situation is without getting into any real. I said, I want my mom cremated, and he looked at me. He could tell I wasn't happy, and he said, "Is that what she wants, or is that what you want?" I said, "Well, my problem is that my dad is buried in the Jewish cemetery, my mother is Catholic, and we can't, get her in from that standpoint." The funeral director looked at me. He was George. He said, "Let me tell you what we can do. We can." And I said I wanted a full mass for my mother, and so he said, "Fix the mass. We can have her in the casket. We cannot put a cross or a star of David on the casket. We can arrange to have a rabbi at the gravesite, and your mother can be buried next to your father. She cannot have a cross or a star of David on her headstone." Well, at that point in time in my life, I would travel. I used to do a lot of water expedition work, and so I could be gone for a month at a time. And I said, "Listen, let me just tell you something real straightforward. That is, and this is before I was involved in the business in Reefs. Let me be real clear, and that is that if this happens, all of this has to happen automatically, but you may not even be able to notify me. And if I come back and find out that those pearly gates were locked, I cannot begin to tell you what my reaction is going to be." He literally put his hand on my shoulder and said, "George, don't worry. Go outside." I had recently just told my brother about the stroke, and I called him, and he knew exactly what I had heard. We heard it at the same time. She wanted to be cremated. And so I called him and I said, "Bob, I got to tell you what I've done. I've arranged for mom to be buried next to dad." And he got very quiet on the phone. And I was waiting for an explosion. And all he said is, "That's perfect."
Mm.
And literally from that point going forward, our lives together changed. And sure enough, when my mother passed, we had a full mass. We drove her down to the cemetery. A rabbi met us there. And my mother is now buried next to my father. And I will tell you, that cemetery is so much healthier. My mother was one of those people, and I hate to say this, nothing, but she was one of those people that she still had every friend she ever made when she died.
Yeah.
And so
Mass. The funeral was big. Yeah. People don't realize that funeral directors and people who are in this field, the death care field, know the ins and outs, and the majority of us will bend over backwards to make sure that the family is taken care of. Every single funeral director I've met with is like that. They say that they're there to make sure that to make whatever the family wants happen. So, yeah. So thank you for that story. I know that you also support doing this with pets. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure thing. Um, We frequently get calls from people saying, my dog, my cat passed away, and they love being at the beach, and I want to do a memorial. We would explain to them, we're more than happy to do this, but we are very heavily regulated, and we have to meet the same regulatory requirements for animals that people. So what we say to them is, if you want, you can hold on to your pet's remains until your time comes, and then we can put the two of you together in the same memorial reef, and it doesn't cost you anything additional. We're glad to do that. And instantly, we have a new best friend. Most people hadn't even thought about that. And so the reaction that we get is, I can be with Oz for eternity. And from here on out, and one of the things that's great about doing it from this perspective is every one of us who has pets talks about them.
Yeah.
And they talk about the ones that are gone.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've got a lot of people out there saying, when I go, Oz is going with me. What do you mean? I said, yeah, well, Oz and I used to go to the beach all the time. And so I put in my papers that when I go, I want to be a reef ball and make sure they put Ozzy in there with me. And it's it's rare that we don't have pets. We've had some ridiculous. And when I say ridiculous, I don't mean it from a negative standpoint, but we've had families show up with as many as 23 pets.
Yep. I could imagine.
We have included memorials with everything from ferrets, parrots, frogs, right on down the line to dogs and cats and birds. We also work very closely with a number of the turtle hospitals and rescue organizations. And so we have done specific memorials for a number of turtles. We have Dare's Reef up in Topsail Island, North Carolina, which was dedicated to a Kemp Ripley turtle that they had cared for years. A quick story with regards to that is there was the first turtle that the hospital got when the hospital opened. And the hospital was destroyed in one of the hurricanes in the early 90s. And they found Dare still in her tank in a tree. And so when they brought her back in the hospital, she was never going to be released into the wild. She became a favorite of all of the visitors to the aquarium. And they used to have spa days. Once a month, they would take Dare and they would treat Dare and clean her up and monoclize her and everything else. You could tell the difference between when the staff was coming in to feed her and she would swim to the side of the tank versus when the vet came in to examine her and she would swim to the middle of the tank. And so it was a tremendous honor for us to do more. And we've done, at this point in time, I think we've done probably 30 turtle memorials for different organizations.
Right. Well, wow. So I also know that you support our veterans.
We do. We have, I want to see how I want to go with this. Almost from the beginning, we recognized that we were going to do a lot of veterans, and we have, and virtually every project that we have, we do a memorial for a veteran, make sure they get their military honor. That's very important to us. We've had a couple of absolutely unbelievable experiences. We had one instance in Ocean City, New Jersey, where we memorialized 5 World War II combat veterans. We did Army, Air Force, Marines, Army, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard, and a merchant mariner. And merchant mariners were eligible for military funeral honors if they served during a war in a combat zone. And this particular merchant mariner had served on 5 different ships that had been sunk during World War II. I do not know whether or not he was on board when each of or any of these ships were struck, but he had 5 ships that he had served on that were sunk during the war, and we had traffic stopped or blocks around, did the military honors, and it was just an amazing experience. And so we're very focused on that. We also kind of recognize that with the changing of times, I always wanted to try a way to approach the veterans community. And we did. We laid out these memorials in the same rows and columns in the exact same manner that you see in any of our national cemeteries.
Mm.
And we got turned down by the VA when we made the proposal. So I got involved with a group that was planning on sinking a submarine, an old World War II submarine, as an artificial reef. And they asked me if there was a way that Eternal Reefs could be involved. And as a kid, I had followed the Pacific War, predominantly the naval side of the Pacific War. Um, and so without even giving it a thought, I immediately said, yeah, we can do a memorial for all the submarines that are still on eternal patrol that have never come back. So we started working in that direction without realizing that I was talking about 65 submarines.
Hmm.
So we started working on it. The concept of sinking a submarine kind of fell apart. And by that point in time, I had run my mouth so loud, so often in front of so many different groups that I kind of felt obligated to do this. And in the back of my mind, I had always been looking for a project that I could use as a demonstration project to the VA that would show our capability. And so we got involved with the USSVI, the United States Submarine Veterans Incorporated, the retired submariners, and proposed this to them. I was invited to Kings Bay Submarine Base. Every year, this goes back to about 2014, yes, they would have a memorial service around Veterans Day, and they would bring in all the surviving World War II submariners that could attend. This was a big honor thing. And so I was sitting in the back of the audience and talking to a couple of folks and explained what I was there for and what I needed to do. And everybody said, you need to go talk to Al Smith. Like to do Al. So I go down after the ceremony's over. Al Smith in his mid-90s. I'm sitting next to him. And I start to explain what it is we're planning on doing. And he looks at me and he puts his arm around me. And he goes, George, that's perfect. That's where they all are. And again, some simple statements resonate so strongly. And so Al Smith has since passed away. But we on our own, as Eternal Reefs, and actually as the Genesis Reef Project, which is our parent nonprofit, we decided that we were going to go ahead with this. And we created 65 memorial reefs, one for each submarine that is on eternal patrol. One has its own individual plaque identifying the submarine, the best known date of loss, the best known location of the submarine, and any fatalities on the submarine. We had a number of submarines that lost nobody, other submarines that lost part of the crew, and we know other submarines that lost everything. And so Memorial Day 2018, we had military funeral honors for all 65 submarines. We had cadets come from the Sarasota Military Academy. These were 6th and 7th graders. Each one had become a docent, a specialist on a particular submarine. We had Tropical Storm Michael that dumped 10 inches of rain on us that day. These kids showed up. We had over 400 people at the park, and we did military honors for each of the submarines, and each of the the cadets got to present their submarine flag to a retired submariner. We then took all the submariners out on a boat, and we took out 6 memorials. We took out the memorial that recognized the entire submarine service and all of the submariners that were lost in non-sinking events. We put out a memorial that specifically honors the USSVI and their contribution. And then after World War II, the United States lost 4 submarines. We lost the Cheeto, we lost the Stickleback, we lost the 2 big ones, the Thresher and the Scorpion. And so we put down those 4 memorials. And then we announced the memorialization of all 65. And each one of the submariners had a tribute reef decorated in flowers. And as their submarine was announced, they would dedicate the reef site to their submarine by dropping the memorial over the side. One of the people that we had on board had transferred off the thresher less than 24 hours before she set sail on her final mission. And he told us he had never gone to another scorpion memorial until this. And again, you start to emotionally, and I'm not a particularly emotional person, but you start just starting to recognize how much this all means. And it means different things to different people. And so when I hear that, it changes, my perception of it. But right now, we have had on the ocean floor for 7 years a completely undisturbed memorial reef laid out in the same rows and columns that you will see in any of our national cemeteries. All of the plaques facing due west out to sea. And it is thriving.
I think that we're almost at the end of the time. I wanted to ask you one more question. What future goals do you have for Eternal Reefs, both in terms of expanding your impact and advancing reef technology?
Well, let me answer the first one, the second part first, and that is when it talks about advancing reef technology, one of the real hidden benefits in what we do is we add significant populations, committed populations, to a lot of the environmental causes. These people are now dedicated to the marine environment at a level they never were before. So they don't ever hear about an oil tanker spilling oil somewhere and not at least subconsciously have the reaction, that could have been where mom is. And so we get a huge benefit. And again, just the continual awareness of reef ball and what we're doing enhances the opportunity. We get calls from other countries now asking us about whether or not this is something that we can do there. And the reality is we're a very small organization. I'm not a big business person, and I like running a small business, but we have to change how we're approaching it. And we're going through some very significant challenges and thought processes right now with the best way to reach out. The next couple of years will really be deepening our delivery system. We're going to need partnerships. We're going to need relationships because the key is the whole thing revolves around replacing me. And that really is the challenge.
Now, when you say policing you, is it because you want to do so much that people are like,
No. I meant replacing me. Okay. That's really the challenge. And between us, a lot of it's ego.
Yeah.
But you get trapped in your own ideas. And I need to step back out.
Yep.
I've done this for 25 years. I've kind of got my own paradigms now that may no longer be valid or may never have been valid.
Yeah.
And it needs somebody with a broader sense of vision and a much broader ability to organize and recruit. I'm a operations manager, and I always tell people the big difference between operations and sales. Salespeople can't wait to tell you what they're going to do. Operations people can't wait to show you what they've done. And right now, I need somebody much more on the sales side.
Yep.
It's really my struggle.
That's valid. So wonderful. So, well, George, thank you so much for being on the show. Before we wrap up, can you tell our listeners how they can learn more about Eternal Reefs and you?
Absolutely. Our website is www.eternalreefs.com. We are on Facebook. We have over 25,000 fans, and I would tell you that it's a memorialization company. That's a good number. And so those are the ways to reach us. You can reach us through Facebook. You can reach us through the website.
Great. Thank
So,
you.
Traci, thank you. I appreciate it. I love the opportunity. You just let me talk, and that's my favorite thing to do.
Wonderful. So I appreciate all of your stories. They were very interesting. Um, And let's wrap this up. Folks, a reef burial is a unique way to honor our loved ones. It also supports the health of our oceans. This approach offers a gentle reminder that our connection to the world doesn't end with our passing. By becoming part of these marine habitats, we contribute to the ongoing care of our environment, leaving behind a legacy that nurtures life and sustains the beauty of our planet. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.